Alright, so, here's the deal, folks. We have officially reached the point in 2021 where there is no more new music to talk about. So instead, we're going to talk about some old music. We're going to review every single studio album from one of the 90s most commercially successful and iconic metal bands, the one and only motherfucking Pantera. I know that some of y'all have been asking about this for a long time. You're finally getting it. Congratulations. You're fucking welcome. As per the norm with these discography reviews, I will be talking about each album in order of release and assigning them a final score out of 5. I will also be focusing exclusively on Pantera's studio albums. I'm not interested in EPs, demos, live albums, compilations, or anything that any Pantera side project like Down, Damage Plan, or Hell Yeah may have also released. With that out of the way, let's officially get started with Metal Magic, released June 10th, 1983, independently via Metal Magic Records. And, yeah, we're not exactly starting off strong, to put it bluntly. Look, it's common knowledge that long before Pantera were the groove, alt, thrash metal champions of 90s rock clubs, they were a pretty straightforward kind of heavy metal glam rock band, and that's fine. I've no issue with Pantera being a more straightforward kind of metal or rock band. That's not the issue with Metal Magic. The issue is, this is just a completely incompetent record in so many fucking ways. It's horribly produced. The songwriting is incredibly generic and cliche, and it's just overall a somewhat clumsy and ugly mess. Even Metal Magic's best moments I would pretty confidently describe as below average. There's just nothing all that spicy or fun or flavorful or exciting happening on this record. It's a plain Jane 80s rock number, to the point where I really don't think we'd be talking about this at all if it didn't bear the Pantera name. It would have been forgotten about entirely if Pantera's name was not attached to this in any capacity. I guess if you're really craving, borderline desperate for some old school 80s heavy metal, and you don't mind the lack of resources and, quite frankly, songwriting chops, then go nuts. Maybe this is for you, but I was totally, completely bored throughout the entirety of this thing, and I would very happily give it a 1.5 out of 5. In my opinion, easily the worst album in the Pantera discography. Nothing else even comes fucking close. Next up, we have Projects in the Jungle, released July 27th, 1984, independently again via Metal Magic Records. This is not a great record, but it is definitely an improvement over the debut. There's a lot more money being put into the production of the record. It has a bigger, brighter sound. The riffs are a little more hefty, a little bit more crisp. The hooks are a little bit more dynamic. Terry Glaze is a little bit more prominent in the forefront of the sound. The riffs, the beats, the solos across the record are a lot more interesting. Clearly the band have been practicing a lot and have been sharpening their songwriting skills. Well, at least as far as the music is concerned. The lyrics are still pretty stupid, and the songs overall are still a touch generic, but, you know, it's an improvement nonetheless. There are some deep, hidden, underrated gems on here, a lot of fun tracks, a lot of fun moments. The title track in particular, I think is kind of a banger, especially if it's like super thrashy kind of breakdown, which almost unintentionally foreshadows the sound that Pantera would soon after this define. I don't really have much more to say. It's still ultimately a pretty straightforward kind of 80s rock and metal record, but a lot better than Metal Magic. I think I'd give it like a 2.5 out of 5, but a very enthusiastic one, you know? Like, if I saw this in a record store and someone asked me about it, I wouldn't go, it's okay, whatever. I would be more like, yeah, it's okay, yeah, check it out, there's some fun songs on there, you know? Next up, we have I Am the Night, released August 16th, 1985, once again independently, via Metal Magic Records, and it's It's okay. That's all I really gotta say. In some ways, it's a more bombastic and sleazy record. I'm reminded of like mid-80s Motley Crue and Def Leppard in some parts, but musically, it's more or less the same thing we heard on Projects in the Jungle. Some fun riffs, some fun hooks, some fun solos, some really stupid lyrics, and some really predictable, generic, cookie-cutter, kind of hard rock, glam metal songs, but by no means an inoffensive listen. I don't feel like I wasted my time, per se, listening to this. I enjoyed it about as much as I enjoyed Projects in the Jungle. So with that in mind, I guess this is an enthusiastic 2.5 out of 5 as well. Yeah, that's kinda it. The only other thing there is to talk about is the fact that this is Terry Glaze's final album with Pantera, and he takes advantage of that because he screams and yells a lot, and good for him, I guess. Next up, we have Power Metal, released sometime between May and June 1988. The exact release date is somewhat disputed. It was released independently via Metal Magic Records. It is their first album with Phil Anselmo on lead vocals, and it's their first where we see some legitimate evolution in Pantera's sound and identity, for the fucking better, might I add. Sonically, the album is a little bit more abrasive, a little bit more hostile, punky, and in-your-face. It's stylistically similar to that of Exodus or early Metallica, or at the very least a clear departure from the Motley Crue, Def Leppard-inspired kind of 80s rock and metal of previous studio albums. Dimebag is really beginning to shine as a guitarist with a lot of really dynamic, cutthroat riffs and breakdowns and guitar solos. Phil is great on vocals. Everyone all around actually sounds really great. This is the first time listening to a Pantera album, at least when you're listening to the discography all the way through, that everyone sounds really jazzed and pumped to be there. I mean, I'm sure they had fun making their previous studio albums, don't get me wrong, but here it sounds like they're having a fucking party. Here it sounds like they're just drinking and smoking and fucking nonstop, and I'm not gonna lie, I'd go back in time and I'd go to that fucking party. Hell fucking yeah. Sounds rad. It's still not the most inventive thing in the world, but it has a lot more charm and personality than previous studio albums and is ultimately a lot more fun. I would give this a very enthusiastic 3.5 out of 5, and if for whatever reason you've yet to check out Pantera's early discography, understandable, but make an exception for just this album because it's actually pretty fucking good. And this now brings us to the game-changing, genre-defining, and arguably creating record that is Cowboys from Hell, released July 24th, 1990 via Atco Records. There is some debate as to who specifically created the groove metal sound, but I don't think there's any arguing that this made the sound popular. Like, this is to groove metal what Kill 'Em All was to thrash metal. Maybe not the first, but definitely the biggest thing yet. Every riff, beat, vocal assault is searing, chunky, heavy as fuck. The album reeks of piss, vinegar, and room temperature whiskey. All these years later, it's still such a fun and rambunctious record from start to finish. I mean, I challenge you not to want to just break shit the moment you hear that title track. I challenge you not to want to dance along to so many of these riffs, to not want to mosh and scream and sing. There are some tracks that are definitely more interesting, more memorable than others. Like, I didn't really care much for Medicine Man and some other stuff on the second half of this record. But my God, the aforementioned Cowboys from Hell, Cemetery Gates, Hearsay, Psycho Holiday, even the closing track, The Art of Shredding, my God, all bona fide jams. Easily a 4 out of 5 for me. It was a great record in 1990, and it remains a great record over 30 years later. It's one of the most influential and iconic metal records of the 1990s, and possibly ever. I mean, there's so many bands, that so many genres of movements and styles and ideas that just don't exist without Pantera's specific take and angle on what we now describe as groove metal. It's just fucking great. What more do you need me to say? How many more times do I need to say it? It's fucking great. Check it out. You've likely already heard it, but just in case you haven't, Go check it out. Next up, we have Vulgar Display of Power, released February 25th, 1992 via Atco Records. I get the vibe that at the time, maybe some people thought Cowboys from Hell was a bit of a fluke, a little bit of a accident to a certain extent, and nobody expected them to replicate the success sonically or commercially. Those people were very clearly very wrong, because Vulgar Display of Power is in many ways just as big of a record as Cowboys from Hell was, perhaps in some ways bigger. More importantly, for the sake of this video, it's also just a better record altogether. It refines everything that album did so well and elevates it to new extremes, and as such, it's actually my favorite Pantera album. There's not a single moment on this record that does not immediately make me want to pump iron or destroy something the moment I hear it. You've got the explosive, thrashy, groove-laden bruiser that is Mouth for War, the dominating, sludgy, ominous powerhouse that is A New Level, the iconic jock bro gym guy anthem that is Walk, the incredibly brutal By Demons Be Driven, the genuinely cathartic closing track Hollow. It's just fucking awesome. If Cowboys from Hell is Pantera's Kill 'Em All, then Vulgar Display of Power is their Master of Puppets or their Ride the Lightning. It is a vast improvement in every single way. It's heavier, it's louder, it's nastier, it's got more attitude, it's got better riffs, better hooks, better everything. The production is incredible. I mean, it was pretty solid on Cowboys from Hell, but Terry Date's production here is just so sharp and so fierce. I mean, this kind of defines the sound of metal for the next decade. I mean, it's just so good. Honestly, for me, 4.5 out of 5, easily. It's the band's best record. It's an incredible fucking record. Holy shit, I love this fucking record. I want this on vinyl. I'm now upset with myself because I do not own this on vinyl. Why don't I own this on vinyl? Yo, Chompy, I don't know where you are, but if you're listening, I know what I want for Christmas. I want this fucking record. Don't say anything if you're gonna buy me this record for Christmas. Thank you, Chompy. I love you. Next up, we have Far Beyond Driven, released March 22nd, 1994 via East West Records. This is an album so heavy that I actually started bleeding. I'm not lying at all. I think this is from a pre-existing wound, mind you, but it looks like the scab came off or some shit. I don't really know, so I'm gonna quickly apply this bandage, and then we're gonna talk more about this album. There we go. Clearly I was moshing too hard in between all these edits while listening to Pantera. Obviously, that's what was happening. Definitely. Obviously. Definitely didn't just, hit a coffee table and therefore reopen a wound. Definitely didn't do that. Not at all. This is a way more muscular and aggressive album in comparison to Cowboys and Vulgar Display. It's very in your face. It's very dark. It's very sonically brutal at times. There are a lot of hefty, chunky breakdowns, a lot of really destructive vocals from Phil Anselmo. I mean, this dude sounds like he is just an absolute fucking agony across so many of these songs. I mean, there are still some cheeky, almost comical little bits and pieces here and there, but overall, this does lack the enthusiasm, the rambunctious thrash groove metal energy of, well, Cowboys and Vulgar Display, which is fine, obviously. That's a good thing in many ways. You want music to evolve, or at least I want music to evolve. But it does make for a somewhat demanding listen, particularly when you get into the second half, and you start getting into some of the more emotionally heavy cuts. For that reason, I feel like this album works better in small doses, but I would still recommend this. I would still give it a 4 out of 5, perhaps a semi-cautious one to a Pantera virgin, to somebody who had never heard Pantera before, but I would still recommend it. There is still a lot of great material on here. It's just a touch more demanding than what we've been hearing from Pantera on their last 2 or 3 records. Next up, we have the Great Southern Trendkill, released May 7th, 1996 via East West Records. Without question, the band's most experimental and aggressive album. The lyrics are dark, disturbed, Very introspective, very troubling, very psychotic. The production is so dark, so heavy. The riffs, the guitar solos are absolutely insane. Phil Anselmo sounds like an absolute monster across this thing. There are so many demented, psychopathic screams and wails. This is a very challenging record. It is sonically devastating, and I love every fucking second of it. I really like how dark and morbid and introspective so much of the album's lyrics and themes are. It is in many ways perhaps Pantera's most emotionally revealing and cathartic and transparent record in that sense. I love a lot of the acoustic guitar work. I like the ballads across this record. I like the thrash and death metal influences subtly popping up across the record. These guys are clearly going through some shit emotionally, physically at this point in their lives, but they're using all of that pain, that anger, that anguish, all of those hard times and tribulations to create something incredibly fucking powerful. In theory, I shouldn't like this album because it is so challenging in so many ways, but the music is so consistently good and still fun enough that you can vibe with some of the super ultra heavy ideas and tunes. Like, as soul-crushingly heavy as so much of this music is, you're still gonna be bobbing your head. You're still gonna fucking throw your fist in the air like some drunk dude at a football game. Honestly, I would give this a 4.5 out of 5 as well. This is an incredible record. Not my favorite. That title still firmly belongs to Vulgar Display of Power, but this is easily a solid number 2. And now this brings us to the band's 9th and final studio album, Reinventing The Steel, released March 21st, 2000 via East West Records. After this, Pantera would disband, and considering the fact that half of this lineup is dead, I think it's safe to say that they will not reunite. Although that said, I never thought there'd be a Led Zeppelin reunion, or a Guns N' Roses reunion, or a Misfits reunion. And all three have happened within the time that this album has come out to now. So, who fucking knows? Anything's possible, I suppose. As far as this album is concerned, honestly, it's never really done a lot for me. It's pretty good, you know, there's a lot of tasty, spicy riffs on here, don't get me wrong. The more aggressive flavors of Great Southern Trendkill are definitely still intact. A lot of the screaming, a lot of the deaf, groove-laden, thrashy passages. But the production isn't quite as strong, the performances aren't quite as enthused, and the songwriting does feel a little bit more, I don't know, I don't want to say generic because Pantera have such a unique style, but it's definitely more predictable. Pantera at this point are a bit of a one-trick pony, and while it's a trick they do pretty well, they're definitely not doing it as well here as they did on some other studio albums. It almost kind of feels like a bunch of tracks that were maybe cut off of the last two studio albums that the band kind of compiled for this. Because it definitely has elements of everything we heard from Far Beyond Driven and Great Southern Trendkill, but it's not as punishing, it's not as exciting, and it's not as memorable or as catchy. Reinventing the Steel, definitely a bold choice for an album title, because they ain't reinventing shit on here. Probably my least favorite of the groove metal era of Pantera, but I'd still give it like a 3 out of 5. You know, it's pretty decent. To be fair, any band would have had trouble following up the 4-album kill streak that Pantera left behind in the 1990s. One could argue it's disappointing as a follow-up, but looking at it objectively as a single record, there are plenty of grooves, plenty of hooks, plenty of fucked up shit, and I'm pretty sure that's all Pantera fans want at the end of the day, so if you just like nasty grooves, you're not interested in all that introspective, personal, experimental shit, or you just don't care, you know, it's simple, it's meat and potatoes, go for it, man. Have fun. 3 to 5. No judgment. And that is it! Voila! 9 studio albums, 1 video. That was fun. Now y'all can finally leave me alone, because I finally did a reviewing every Pantera album video. Thank you, that'd be great. Now it's time for you to tell me, what do you think of Pantera? What's your favorite album from them? What's your least favorite album from them? Do you prefer the heavy glam metal era or like the groove thrash death metal era? Let me know, and let me know what other bands you'd like to see covered in a video of this type in the future. That'd be pretty swell if you did that. Press this button right here so you can get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.